everyone. This short-ish lecture is going to talk to you a little bit about Major Assignment 3 and what all you should be doing to create it, and hopefully talk a little bit more about the rhetorical appeals, kind of give you a brush up on that. And at the end, I've come up with some questions that I think you might have and that will hopefully help you decide how to create your Major Assignment 3, A Tale Through Time. So let's just talk very quickly about where we've been and where we're going. You know, in Unit 2, we did a lot of background fact gathering. We read in our textbook about finding resources. We read Little Red Riding Hood. We watched Hoodwinked. We did research on the database articles. We learned how to do new things in MLA. You had short videos that helped you learn more about the text and the context, and we had discussions about the audience and the purpose and what was like in 17th century France for Little Red Riding Hood, its original author and audience, and what it's like in the early 2000s when we see the animated film Hoodwinked come out and what the audience and context was like for that. So let's just talk really quickly about the elements of Major Assignment 3. For this assignment, you're going to be creating a compare and contrast rhetorical analysis essay. So basically what you're going to be doing is examining how Little Red Riding Hood and Hoodwinked are similar and different in respect to their audiences, their purposes, and their contexts. So who is the audience like for Little Red Riding Hood? Who is the audience like for Hoodwinked? How the original intended audience, how are they similar? How are they dissimilar? What's the historical context surrounding all of that? And what is the purposes that the authors set out to achieve in Little Red Riding and Hoodwinked? And how are those similar and dissimilar? And you'll, of course, use the rhetorical tools of persuasion, ethos, pathos, and logos to consider those things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, how to use those to consider that. So you're comparing and contrasting the two texts, and you're doing it rhetorically. That's it. And it's up to you how you want to approach the text. So what I mean by that is you can decide it's going to be a compare and contrast about Little Red Riding Hood using the rhetorical tools, but you can decide what elements that you want to focus on and what topics that you want to focus on. You might have noticed when you were doing a lot of research, there are a lot of different strategies that authors out there use to talk about these pieces. So, for instance, you might want to talk about, the difference in how women are treated in the 17th century France version versus Hoodwinked. Maybe you want to examine how crime is treated differently in the 17th century version versus Hoodwinked. Maybe you want to examine one character like the Big Bad Wolf and how he changes based on the audience, the context, and the purpose. It's really up to you. You can take it in any direction that you want to do. This is going to be a 5-page MLA formatted essay with an MLA formatted works cited page at the end of the essay in the same file, and the works cited page does not count as part of the paper length. So that's 5 pages with your works cited on page 6. If you go a little over, that's fine. If you go a little under, not fine. Meet 5 full pages, okay? So it's a traditional essay formatted in MLA format. You should have citations for all of your in-text stuff. And you should have a works cited page at the end. For sources, you're going to use 5 sources, and that includes Little Red Riding Hood and Hoodwinked in that count. You may use your annotated bibliography as part of the source count. You might also, and probably will, need to find some more stuff as you kind of narrow down and adjust your topic to something a little more specific. Some of you just focused on Little Red Riding Hood or Hoodwinked in the annotated bibliography, so you're probably going to have to find more stuff about the other piece if you just focused on one or vice versa. But it doesn't matter. You can have a variety. They can come from the web. They can come from the databases. They just have to be reliable, and academic in nature. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about what analysis is. So maybe you're just feeling a little bit like, okay, I'm a little overwhelmed with everything that's going on, and now you're just like, take all this research and write an essay. Have you lost your mind? No, I really haven't. You can do this. You can do this. You've got a lot of work done, and you've talked and thought about a lot about this topic, more than you think you have. Your brain might feel a little bit like it needs a jump start, but you got this, okay? So we need to move from analyzing to understand, which is kind of what we do like when we're taught to write in high school, like what we're taught to write the what that happened, who did it. Where when we're writing in college analysis, we really want to write about not just that, but the how and the why. We already know what happened in both stories, but now to take our analysis to the next level, we need to break it into small pieces to learn how those pieces fit together and ask how and why the author did certain things to get their purpose across to the audience and to their intended audience. So we are looking at the how and the why. If you're doing that, you're doing it right. Okay? If we can describe the parts of a text and how they fit together into a whole, then we can say we understand the text and what its composer's purpose might have been in producing it, right? So whenever I say that this is an argumentative essay, students kind of just like panic because you've been conditioned to think that arguments are pro, con, yes, no, good, bad. And the fact of the matter is anytime we make a statement about a text's meaning, we are making, in fact, making an argument. We are saying, well, I believe that this text means this, and your neighbor might say, I believe that it means this. We're making an argument. It's not the same type of argument as a pro-con argument, but it is a reasoned, claim that we're making when we say those things. So that's what we're attempting to do here. So here are some strategies. If you're thinking, okay, this is great, I'm kind of getting what you're saying, but what are the steps I can take to kind of like get my brain together and think about it? So I think the first step is to identify the persuasive strategies that have been chosen by the text author. Okay. First is examine their strategy. What are the things you can identify in the text that are specific choices made by the text composer? For example, in Hoodwinked, what are some things specifically that the director does to develop Red's character? How is she described looking versus how how Little Red Riding Hood is described in Parole's piece? What is the strategy there? Things you can look at are the author's choices, like their arguments, their evidence, their organization, their style, and their features. In our discussion and lectures, we've really been identifying these strategies. Maybe you haven't been aware of it, but that's what we've been doing when I've been saying, hey, what do you think about this in the short writing assignment? Or what do you think about that? Or what do you know? Apply those strategies to the critical reading of the scholars, too, that you're looking at that are talking about Little Red Riding Hood. So that's our first step. Our second step is to consider how those strategies help us identify the audience, purpose, and context of a text. So if you're thinking about, okay, so I just did step one. I've looked at the different persuasive strategies chosen by the author throughout the text. I've looked at how they've organized things. I've looked at the style. I've looked at features. I've looked at different arguments they've made in there. So now I'm going to ask some questions about the audience. Who is the audience? What is the intended audience like? Some of you, when you were analyzing the audience of Little Red Riding Hood, you're like, oh, it's general children's audience. That's not true. Charles Perrault could have never imagined that we would have been sitting here on a funny magic screen listening to a professor tell you how to write in your own living room. Okay? He was not thinking about you when he wrote this. He did not know that the United States really even existed. Okay? So what you have to think about is asking who that audience was. What was the audience like in 17th century France that would have been intended for that, because it was intended for a very specific audience group, as we talked about and we learned about in the different research that we found. What's the audience for Hoodwinked like? In the early 2000s, there was a big girl power movement, and it's very clear in the way that film is directed and created. Ask about the purpose. What is the purpose? What was the author trying to accomplish? They're not solving they're not solving or finding a vaccine for the coronavirus here. They are. It's not, maybe not as like a more. There are probably more important purposes out there for other things, but they do have a purpose and what message they're trying to convey to their audiences. So think about that. And then ask about the context surrounding all of those things. If you look at the context, the things that are happening around during these time periods, that's going to give you an even broader strategy to consider when you're looking at analyzing the text. Remember, taking our literary analysis to the next level involves examining how a text functions. To do this on a larger scale, we need to do research to form our own ethos as writers, which is what we did in the annotated bibliography. The following appeal portions of this lectures are not just an analysis of what the author of the literature is doing, but you should also consider how scholars are reading text rhetorically too when you're doing your own research. So, here we go. Let's talk about identifying rhetorical strategies. This is kind of a refresher from the beginning of the semester and a refresher from English 101. So I'm going to fly through this really quickly. So I'm not going to yammer on about these. You can always go back to week 1 and look back over that lecture or watch this again if you're still struggling with the rhetorical strategies. First rhetorical strategy we're going to cover is ethos, and that's making assumptions about the text composer. Think about the historical context of the piece. How does the author appeal to the audience's sense of authority? Who is Charles Perrault? Who is the director of Hoodwinked? I mean, if you'll notice, the production company that put out Hoodwinked is the Weinstein Corporation, and quite frankly, that's very controversial now, but when this film came out, and even when I first started having students kind of take a look at this film, that wasn't a controversy. It's probably the reason why I'm going to change this film soon. But think about that. Like, how does it appeal to the audience's sense of authority? I mean, if we're talking about girl power, that could be a little hazy there. Consider your own authority as analyzers. What do you know? What do you not know? What assumptions can you make about the text based on the research that you've done? And the next appeal is pathos. And I think students typically, and maybe you're this way, I don't know, have an easier time with pathos. And that's just examining the emotionality of a piece. How does the author of the text move their audience? What are the things that make an audience happy, sad, scared, anxious? How do other scholars interpret that emotionality of the piece? What pieces do you see in Hoodwinked and Little Red Riding Hood that are emotional, and how are they similar and how are they dissimilar? And then how do you personally interpret the pathos of the piece? Think about those things as you're comparing the text. Our third appeal is logos, and that's the appeal to reason, to the forcefulness of a well thought out and well structured position. I took those words from Understanding Rhetoric, which is a book by Losh, so I've cited my source. There you go. It wasn't a direct quote. That's why it's not in quotes. It's a paraphrase. Anyways, so, really when we think about logos, we think about facts and statistics, and you might find some of that when you do some of your historical research. But it doesn't just have to be about facts and stats. It can be how the piece is organized. Is the logic of the piece well organized? Does the piece make sense? Where does it fail? Where does it not make sense to the audience and the purpose and the context? These pieces aren't just a good job. There are things that are problematic in both pieces that you can talk about. The final rhetorical appeal is the appeal to kairos, and that's thinking about the exact or critical time, season, or opportunity in the piece. What happened? What is the timeliness of the piece? What is the context like of the piece? And is it proportional? Are things all done in the right time or in the exact critical time? So that was just a little review over those rhetorical strategies, just to kind of get your mind thinking about those things again. So now that I've talked about that and given you kind of a little refresher on that, I want to answer a few questions that I thought you might have and that this might be kind of helpful to you. So, how do I use all this information to write a rhetorical essay comparing two pieces of literature? It's really awesome that like in 10 minutes you just like dumped all of this information into my brain, but like what do I do with it, Professor Buzzer? Please tell us. Help. So in this major assignment, you don't need to be writing the ethos of the text is. That might have been an exercise you did in the beginning of English 101. Instead, you want to use the tools of persuasion to help you analyze the text closely and in a way that is thoughtful and seamless, okay? So instead, you might explain why the audience would find an author credible and how that is similar or dissimilar to the other text. Sorry for the typos in this one, y'all. I mean, I thought I proofread, but sorry. I see them now, just so you know. But you're just using the tools of persuasion to help analyze the text closely. That's it. You shouldn't be saying the pathos is, the ethos is. You're using those tools for your benefit. Okay, so we are using these strategies to compare and contrast exactly what again? I know you've listened for 15 minutes and you still have no idea what's going on. That's okay. Sometimes we just need to be told 3 different ways, right? So you will be comparing and contrasting both the film and the short story by examining how the audience, purpose, and context affected how the authors developed each piece. And that can be done in any way you see fit. You may pick a topic about the 2 pieces that interests you the most. Is there a specific topic we have to focus on when considering both texts? No. You get to decide what you focus on. There is not a right or wrong here. Everyone's essay will be different. I mean, it's going to have some similarities. It's going to have MLA format. It's going to be 5 pages. It's going to have resources, but the topics and the meat inside the sandwich, everyone's sandwich is going to taste different, okay? Some people might be more like peanut butter while some are ham, okay? So you might focus on the historical context concerning women at the time. Someone else might focus on how crime is treated in both pieces. The possibilities are really endless. So it's up to you to kind of decide which way you're going. At this point in your first year composition sequence, you're at the end of English 102. We're getting there. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. And you need to be able to trust yourself to generate your own topics. As you go forward in your academic career and then in your professional careers, it's going to be up to you to make, especially if you want to go into management and things like that, it's going to be up to you to make your own creative decisions on what to write about in your field. And it's up to you now in this course to make your own creative decisions about what you're going to write about. Okay, what about resources? Do we use our annotated bibs? Can we add more? As I said earlier, I hope you will be able to use all of your annotated bibliography. The point of finding all of those research is so that you can use it. However, you're probably, as you develop your topic, going to have to add more research or find different sources to kind of fit in with how you've kind of changed your ideas around. So you probably will need to add more research. That's fine too, as long as you have a minimum of 5 cited sources. That includes the short story and the film. In the paper, you're good. I think A papers are going to have at least 1 or 2 database sources in their assignment that they've analyzed. I think that's where the A's are going to have those. They're going to use that research. You can find other things that are good and reliable on the web. You just need to make sure they're academic. This is your chance to show me that you understand how to do that. Okay? So here's we're excited. We always want to give credit where credit is due. I hope that you found this helpful. I hope that this helps you. And please, please, please let me know if you have any questions, I'm always here to help. Have a great day.